In this video, we're going to be talking about routers and what they do. Now, you've almost certainly seen a router because you probably have one at your own house. They usually look like something like this. These are the consumer routers, and these are generally what you would get either from the internet service provider or you would buy one yourself. But usually the ISP will send you something that looks like this that has actually 4 devices in one, which is a modem, a router, a switch, and a Wi-Fi access point. But we won't deal too much about all the different things they can do in this video. Routers can also take different forms. For example, these are the consumer routers. If you do it for but if you look at, for example, enterprise routers, they usually look a lot bigger and have a lot more features and would usually be rack mounted. And I personally find that the best way to explain how routers work and what they do is to show it visually. So right here we have a setup. In this case, we have our laptop over here, which is connected through Wi-Fi. This laptop could also be, a tablet or your phone. It doesn't really matter what the endpoint is in this case. It's just that it's connected through Wi-Fi to this router here. This router is, again, something that a consumer would have. So the laptop is connected to the router via Wi-Fi. Now, to keep things as simple as possible, we're going to ignore things like cable routers and things like that. Instead, we're going to have the output from this router going through the internet here, going to a different router, which then leads to a switch and then a server. So what we want to do is we want to have it so that our laptop can access the website on this server. And to do that, it has to make the request over the internet. In this case, this shows exactly what a router does. A router, its name is very literal. A router is there to route network traffic between one network and another. A very common and good analogy for this is think about how a post office works. Say you want to, let's say this is a house, not a laptop. Let's say this is your house and this is like the streets and this is a company you want to send a letter to. So you have a letter you want to put into the mailbox that you want to send to this company. Well, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up putting that letter. Like the actual endpoint of where that letter is going to be delivered to is not necessarily going to be well known. But fortunately, you don't have to worry about that because that's why the post office exists. So your house here will send a letter to the post office. For example, this could be like the local post office in your neighborhood. And then the internet here would be the paths between different post offices. And you end up with this post office here. And this post office knows where the server is in this case, or the business. That's exactly how it works in terms of computing. The laptop, in this case, does not know where the server is, and it doesn't need to know, frankly. All it needs to know is where to send the data so that eventually it ends up at the server. The job of actually getting the data to the server is the job of the router. So let's say on my laptop here, I open this up, and I want to access the web page on this server. Now, the network here on this computer is very different from the network on this computer. And the computer doesn't know how to talk directly to the server, nor can it. It's not possible. Instead, it has to send the letters through the routers, just like you would send a letter through the post office to get to another building or a person or a company. So in this case, I'm going to open the web browser up. And before I enter anything in, I'm going to switch this over to simulation mode so you can see exactly what's happening. I'm going to go to a laptop. I'm going to type in the address for the server, which in this case is 172.16.10.2. So what we're going to do is we're going to click go. And we can see that the laptop has spawned in these letters here, which are traditionally called packets in terms of networking. So now I'm going to, for right now, I'm going to actually move this. So the laptop has its packets ready to go. And what it's going to do is it's going to send them directly to the router. So it sent this letter to the router, or packet to the router, and now the router is going to send it to the internet. The internet in this case is, you can kind of think of it as a large collection of routers, sort of like a spider web of routers. And when it goes through the internet, it's going to take a path that is frankly unknown to us. It could take several different jump points. It could go through dozens of routers before it actually reaches this router. So we're going to just kind of ignore what happens in here right now, other than to say that it's passing through a lot of routers. So it moves through the network. or through the internet. It arrives at the destination router, goes down to the switch. We'll cover the switches later. And down to the server, where the server sees the response or the request, and then it in turn sends back packets to the computer, which then arrive on our laptop. Now this goes on for a little bit because of how networking works. There is a procedure in place to make sure that packets get received and communication starts in a way that's controlled. So this happens for a little while, but eventually what we're going to have is when the packets arrive back at the laptop, we now have our web page. So this web page here was sent by this server to our computer through the internet and through the routers. So the ultimate takeaway from this is to remember that routers are there to direct the flow of traffic. They're very similar. You know, if nothing else, consider routers to be like the post office. You know, when you send a letter to someone in the mailbox, you don't decide how that letter gets there. That's the job of the post office. So it's exactly the same situation here. This laptop doesn't know how to get to the server. That's the job of the router.